Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session in our session 3 workshops. It is Hope is a Read Aloud, talking with young readers about LGBTQ inclusive books with Aimee, Ellis, and Katie Hollenberg. Before I bring them on, just a few things to say. First of all, if you are inspired at any point during this session, which you definitely will be, or have been at any point today, please do pay the joy forward. The EdClab gathering is totally free. It has always been our gift to the education community, to literacy educators worldwide. You don't pay a registration to view. You don't have to fly somewhere to attend. You're not quickly shoveling in lunch in between sessions. So what you might normally spend on a registration or even your morning cup of coffee, please consider paying that joy forward. You can go to the Gathering website or go to theedclab.com/charity, and you'll be taken right to our charity pages. Top Notch Scholars was selected by our opening keynote, Lorena and Roberto Herman, and Latinx Kid Lick Book Festival was selected by the EdClab for today. You can learn about both on the charity page and then go directly to their pages to make your donation. No amount is too small. I am so happy, excited, looking forward to being not only learning a lot, but also most certainly being moved again today. Because when I read Aimee and Katie's reading teacher article from ILA's reading teacher, LGBTQ inclusive read alouds in the second grade classroom, I've been in Katie's classroom. I have met Aimee and seen her with her teacher students at college. And I will say, like I told them, I don't normally get emotional to research articles, but this one is a very rare and special gem where it's a look inside of Katie's classroom with Aimee's guidance as a researcher and just watching interactions with Katie's young children around LGBTQ identities and stories. I'll say as a queer person, I was moved by and I'm going to be moved again by what I wish my schooling felt like when I was in second grade or third grade or even high school and beyond. Just the beautiful way that Aimee's capturing Katie's work with kids and their ongoing process, both children and as teachers, to think through how do we talk and think respectfully, appropriately about these people in our lives. And so if you haven't read it yet, please do find it. You can find it free. You can Google it right now. It's just an incredible article. And so without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Katie and Aimee, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Chris. I'm Aimee Ellis.
And I'm Katie Hollenberg.
We are so happy to be here with you today and to learn with you and talk with you and share a little bit about the amazing children that we have had the privilege of working with through the years, but especially in a particular year in Katie's classroom, which we'll talk about. So just a little background, I am a professor in the School of Education at Loyola University here in Chicago. So I first met Katie because I bring my college juniors to the school where Katie works to be able to be in classrooms. And so they are so fortunate to get to learn from Katie as well as other amazing teachers at her school site each year. So Katie?
Sure. Just a little bit about me. I've been teaching second grade since 2001. Prior to that, I taught third grade in another school for 3 years. I am the president of our union, so I feel like I have a responsibility from that lens to try out different things and bring things to the members that we might want to think about. And I have my reading master's degree and my educational leadership degree. And I've loved working with Aimee so much and been inspired by her, not only by how she brings her students into the classroom and really gives them a hands-on opportunity in the classroom, but also how she really pours into the teachers in my school and really encourages us to continue our learning. And so that kind of brings up sort of where we begin this whole adventure. And Aimee, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you got started in writing about inclusion and being interested in about inclusion.
Sure. So prior to starting at university level, I was a public school teacher for 12 years, all grades from 1 through 8 at some point in time and in some role or another. My last 5 years in public schools were in rural Alaska. And I think, I had always worked in very culturally and linguistically diverse environments. But that time in Alaska, I think, is really when it began to hit me, because there's not really a lot of kids' books out there that feature identities of the kids that I was working with. And so I took those experiences with me into a lot of my research and my teaching. I teach children's literature to freshmen in our program each year. And really the focus is inclusive text, because a lot of my teacher candidates aren't aware that there are books out there that they perhaps never got a chance to see themselves in as they were students in elementary, middle, and high school. And I want to make sure that they know that these books exist, so that when they are in their own classroom, they can share those books with their students and really start to center so many different identities. And so that interest is what brought me to the teachers at Katie's school site. And I asked if they would be willing to be part of just some research on my end, but really it was meant to be because I love learning from them. It's research, but honestly, like, I just love to learn from the teachers, especially Katie. I tell everyone she's a national treasure. But so we started with just several different inclusive texts. And one of those texts happened to be Call Me Max, I believe was what started all this, right, Katie?
It is, yes.
And so from there, I think, is what grew our interest in really focusing in on LGBTQ inclusive texts, especially because of the state of our country and book bans and everything that's been going on and seems to be intensifying. And so, Katie, do you want to continue?
In there? So the year prior, I think, Aimee, you had done a small study with looking at civil rights and Black history and those kinds of things, and how do we bring those topics in? And you had shared a lot of books, and I remember we had talked about how we were using them in the classroom, and I was very comfortable with that. But then when you brought in Calvin and we were talking about it, some of the other teachers had a comfort level that I didn't have. And so I really kind of sat in that and just sort of thought about, like, well, why was I so comfortable, or Call Me Max, that's what it was. Why was I so comfortable with talking about race relations, but not LGBTQ? What was it about me? And I realized that was an area that I really needed to work on. And so it really made me feel like this was something that I wanted to do. I was committed to doing it, but I needed some support. And that's where you kind of came in, Aimee, and we sort of had those conversations about, well, what would it look like in the classroom and how could we do this together?
And I appreciated it so much because, Katie, you were so, you just were so open and honest. I mean, to be able to talk about this and then to write about it and know that you are, you were like, I'm not using a pseudonym. I want to be part of the writing here, and putting yourself out there and being really vulnerable to say, you know what, I was nervous. I was scared. This is something I'm brand new to. And I appreciated it so much because you're not alone, right? Like, we know you're not alone. And the fact that you were able to talk about what those hesitancies were and how you pushed through them, I think is something that is one of the best things about the work that we did together, was your willingness to do that. So
think,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's where we kind of started. And so Katie was like, you know what? I'm ready. Like, I remember you saying, like, how can I call myself a true ally if I don't do this work? And so she was more than willing to get started. And so, she also happened to have just like the most amazing little 7 and 8-year-old, I guess, agents of change already in her room. And it was just the perfect opportunity for all of this work to come together. And so we definitely want to. I told Katie, I was like, we got to let those kids' voices live again in our conversation today, because Truly, they are the heart of the work that we did during this whole study. So, so do you want to talk a little, Katie, about just how you were feeling at the start of all of this?
Sure. So I was incredibly nervous. I was truthfully most worried about parent pushback. As you mentioned before, this is kind of a fraught time in our country with how people are feeling about things, and so I was nervous. Luckily, I have an extremely supportive district and an extremely supportive school board, so I knew that if there were parents who were going to be upset, that our school board would talk about inclusion and this is how we operate within our school district. But that being said, it's still really hard to put yourself out there and worry about backlash. So I think we kind of tried to look at ways to kind of start small and then go bigger from there. So the first book, if I remember correctly, was Tango Makes Three.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, penguins are adorable, they're cute. And it kind of introduced the idea of like, okay, so these two penguins happen to be male and they're raising a baby. And what do you think about that? And the kids thought it was great. And I know Chris had mentioned earlier, you know, this beauty of the youth that, you know, second grade is just the most perfect age because they don't have all these beliefs about things, but they also very much believe in social justice and fairness and kindness. And so when you present them with books like this, what they see is love. What they see is people caring about each other. And that's what they value. And so we were able to really tap into that idea as we continue to add more books, this idea of like, what makes a family? Love makes a family. And so presenting it that way, I wasn't as worried with parents because I knew we could all agree that love makes a family.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, you started with Tango, and you know there were no issues. I think you were already a little bit nervous getting started, but at one point, and we quote this in the article, one of the little girls in Katie's class, who actually has two moms, said the book was perfect. And I remember us reflecting on the fact that that particular student was way more engaged in the story that day, the read aloud that day, than she typically was. And so just that, obviously we can't say like it was all because of the book, but I mean, it seemed like that book really resonated with her just to begin to have conversations. Mm-hmm. And so like Katie said, we moved into another book that focused on family. So family structure was sort of the next logical step, I think. And so we pulled in Stella Brings the Family. And if you aren't familiar, it's just Stella has two dads and they're going to have a Mother's Day celebration at school. And she doesn't know who to invite and how she should proceed. And the students are like asking her all these questions in the process, like, well, if you don't have a mom, who kisses your boo-boos when you fall down? And she's kind of like, well, duh, it's my dad. And they ask all of these questions and she has these great answers that it's either one of her dads or it's like a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. And she has this tremendous support system throughout the story. And so I think this is where the kids really began to show what amazing thinkers they were, because they started to have this fantastic conversation about, what does make a family.
Yeah. And I think for me, that was personally a huge turning point to see how the kids navigated. At one point they were saying, well, so maybe we shouldn't celebrate Mother's Day because what if kids don't have moms? They might feel bad, or Father's Day. And then one of the kids said, but yeah, everybody has somebody who loves them. So couldn't we make a card for someone who loves you day? And I thought, that is so inclusive of all of our children. When I think about not just our LGBTQ kids who might have two moms or two dads, but all of our families that are different than, what we typically see as the nuclear family. That's the reality now. And so all of these kids were being included in that. And the fact that they so easily found the solution and thought it was great and ready to move on just showed me this is how I should be too. We can find a solution it's going to be great and move on. We don't have to worry about it. The solution's right there. The kids can figure it out.
And Katie, I think, and you can correct me if I'm thinking of the wrong book, but I feel like this is the time where one of your students mentioned the two dads. Is this right? And he said something like, "Oh, I think the dads are." I'm thinking of a word. It's like a G word, and then the kids started talking about something else. And something that I remember from a prior study I did with a totally different group of teachers is that they also read a book that had a gay character in it. And I think it was like 45 minutes into the conversation with teachers before the teachers used the word gay. And they were sort of like tiptoeing around the word. And then somebody brought it up and how someone in their class said it. And then they were like, "Oh, I don't know if you can say that." Like the kids thought they weren't supposed to say the word. And here the adults were modeling the same thing. And so that came to my mind because when this little boy said that, it would have been so easy for Katie, and knowing how Katie was feeling like, okay, I'm doing this. And it would have been easy for her to just kind of keep on going because the kids didn't come back to it. He just sort of flippantly made this comment like, I'm thinking of a word, it's a G word, but like didn't have the word. And Katie, you explicitly and intentionally circled back to that little boy. And do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I remember this was my biggest fear, right? Somebody actually calling it out and what was I going to say? And in the moment, I remember my palms got sweaty and I thought, oh gosh, I could just let this slide. I don't have to come back to this. And then I started to think about the reasons that I really wanted to do this work. And some of the reasons are, that we know that just having one LGBTQ affirming space reduces suicide attempts by 35% for children. And the strongest association is when they have an LGBTQ affirming school. And as a mom, I just kept thinking about how would I want my kids to be protected? How can I protect the children in front of me that I love so much? And we know that there are going to be LGBTQ kids sitting right there in my classroom. So how do I set them up to keep them safe? And I realized it was by saying the word gay and by addressing that and making it something we talk about, not something we hide, not something we're ashamed of. That's how people are. Some people are that way, some people are other ways, but we have to recognize our students as their whole beings, their families, however they come to us. We have to recognize that because it's really an issue of life. To think that children and other people are harming themselves because we're not willing to be uncomfortable and recognize that families look in all different ways, or we're not really willing to put ourselves out there and have criticism from the community. I just couldn't do that anymore. So long story short, it was a really quick conversation in my head that made me realize like I have to stand up for students and families. And this was my way of doing it by addressing what was the hardest thing for me. And that was to take this topic on head on.
Yeah, 100%. There was another one that in that same conversation where the kids really started to think about, well, oh yeah, of course, families can be this, families can be that. And they were grappling with it. They were so lovely. They were just like, it was like they were natural little teachers with their think alouds. They just made all of their thoughts visible all the time in such amazing ways. But one child in the classroom said, yeah, so you can have two moms, you can have two dads, you can have a mom and a dad. And then she said, I guess you can't have like three moms or three dads. That would be weird. And like, she was just processing this. And Katie, you immediately interjected with very, very gentle and loving, like, let's reconceptualize this around the word weird. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do. I did a lot of thinking, and I think, Aimee, our conversations were really important to me too, because we had those different conversations about how do we handle these things and how do we normalize things. And when I heard the word weird, again, I'm thinking, I know I have children in here who are going to identify, and I certainly knew I had families who identified as part of the LGBT population. And I wanted to make sure that they didn't hear that word weird and think that they were weird. And so I definitely wanted to address that too. But it is hard. I think what really helped was to just have that commitment to saying, I'm an ally. This is what an ally would say. And so every time those situations came up, my choice was always to address the situation in a way that protected children.
Yeah. I just wanted to say I see lots of great comments about people feeling the same way, people feeling nervous, more nervous than the kids, right? Like we often, I think we worry a lot more. And then as Katie saw, she was like, wow, like the kids did not, there was nothing. Like they just talk about topics that if we give kids the chance, I feel like if we give kids the opportunity and the space in our classroom to have conversations about all different identities and all different topics, the ones that we might find uncomfortable, whether it's LGBTQ or something else, I find that they tend to rise to that challenge, and they are so open and inclusive, and they ask questions that are great questions. And like they're ready to have these conversations. So it's so great that you provided the space for this with such young children. I do want to have conversations too about the parents, because I know there's a lot of questions in there about that. But before we did that, I wanted to just talk about Call Me Max as well, Katie, because I think we had such amazing just dialogue with the kids that you were able to facilitate with them. So Call Me Max is about a transgender boy, written by Kyle Lukoff. And it is basically like Max just kind of figuring out school and friends and things like that. And so it gets into everything from gender stereotypes to how Max can navigate the restroom as a transgender child. And the kids were amazing. And so they just had so many great comments, and they grappled. Like Katie, I don't know if you remember, but there was one student who was like, well, like Max is a boy. Max says he's a girl, Max is a girl, but says he's a boy. And you didn't let it go. Like you were like, is he? Like, what is Max? What is Max's gender identity? And at some point he was just exasperated and was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's important for kids to have a safe space to have these questions, to talk about things. And I think one of the things that I try to do is have these conversations where I'm not the expert, but that I can lead them through questioning to kind of come to what they think is the truth. And I think when they look at it without the outside noise of people telling them what they think, that's where their hearts can see that people just should be seen for who they want to be seen as. And they get there naturally. I don't have to direct them. They figure it out. And so having that opportunity to kind of keep kind of pushing the topic until the kids kind of find out what they believe. It's not my opinion, but it's what they think about it. If you want to be a girl and that's how you feel, should you be treated that way? What do you think? And of course, their answer is always like, well, yeah, you should be respected for who you are. And so, I remember that conversation too. And it is confusing for kids too, but I think that allows them to go out into the world and have those conversations with other people and explain why they think the way they think. And that's what we want to do. We empower them to make decisions on their own.
100%. I remember sitting there, and it was great to just see the thinking and processing that this one particular child was doing throughout the book. And at one point, I guess it's Max just says like, I didn't feel that on the inside. And the child was like, oh, like now I get it. And just coming to terms with it and just having this realization was just so powerful. And what I think was really great too is if you choose the right text that's a good match developmentally for your grade level and your students, like they were able to latch on to the ideas that are important to you when you're in second grade, right? So they might not know about all of these different policies or just different things that are going on in the world, but the bathroom situation resonated with them, right? Because like they're second graders, they're like, I can't even imagine having to like hold it all day. That just sounds
Right.
terrible. And
Right.
just being able to find aspects of it that they could relate to so that, you know, they were like, it felt relevant to their lives, I think made a big difference. And so that's where like finding the absolute right connection with a text is so helpful.
Yes, I agree. And I think for them too, that idea, and you touched upon it, that idea of gender stereotypes too, that really got them going also because they all could relate to that, right? Maybe they couldn't all relate to needing to feeling differently inside than their gender, but they all could relate to like, well, I'm a girl and I like bugs, or I'm a boy and I like to do, sing. And so they all could relate to that. So then they started to really question, like, well, should somebody else tell me what I should like or what I should do? And I think that really opened them up to seeing like everybody should just be accepted for who they say they are.
Yeah.
I think I know I've seen a couple of questions about, how do you handle parent backlash? And
Yeah.
I have to say, I haven't had much of that. I'm very lucky, but I have prepared for it. And so some of the things that Aimee and I, as she mentioned before, have done is really look at the text that we choose and really think about what are some possible things that could come up from this text. How would I address it? Aimee's been instrumental in helping me with that. And so my suggestion would be is if you're going to do this at your school as a teacher, find a thought partner. Take classes, whether it's online or read books to help you kind of think through things, because there are people out there doing this work and they have great suggestions on what to say. And also make sure you connect everything back to the standards, because that's where, you can always say, well, this is the standard we're doing. This book met it. I'm doing my job. So as a teacher, you connect it to standards. Make sure your administrators are aware of what's going on in your classrooms. And certainly if you feel that there's going to be any pushback, let them know that they're going to be hearing from someone. And then I encouraged our teachers at our school to put kind of like a sheet next to the phone of things they could say if a parent called, because I know, it's emotional for me. And I want to make sure that I get my points across to parents if they call to be upset. And so some of the things that I wrote down were just things like, I honor all kids and families, and their inclusion in our community is seen through the books that I read. And I'm choosing to protect all of our students, that I'm in the business of helping students thrive. So I'm involved in the business of equity, no matter what that means, no matter what students are in front of me. I believe in equity. And my job is to support children into developing compassion and to understand how to be in a global world. So just even having some of those things jotted down, and I keep it right by my phone. And I have it there. So if, I have to respond to an email, that, I can say things like, we're not harming straight white kids by promoting a welcoming community. And just sort of have a couple lines so that in the moment I can do it. So I just wanted to share that too, because I think as looking at a lot of the questions about how do we handle the families, even just talking with our administrators, like it's our job to protect our kids. And if we look at the statistics about what happens to our LGBT kids and how they're hurting as they get older, we have to do something. And so that's where I come from. That's my perspective. Like, I can't not.
This is amazing, Katie. I see several people talking about your idea of the, ideas to say by the phone, which is just brilliant. I wanted to circle back and talk more about some of those individual things that you just mentioned. So I saw some people saying about like, reiterating the thought partner. And I think that's really important, especially if you're not so sure about your administrator support. Find someone in your school who believes in these things as well, because having someone else there as a support is a great way to get started. So perhaps the two of you, if it's just two of you, you can figure out how to approach your administration together. And I think really inviting your administrator to come and take a look at these books and understand them better. And I think that could work with parents sometimes as well. A lot of times it's just out there in the world of social media and it's on TV. Like we hear about book bans, we hear about certain states that are very, very vocal and individuals and organizations that are very, very vocal. And that can drown out the voices of those of us who are pushing back against them. And so I think it's all of our job to make sure that we're still heard and letting parents know that I'm not doing a LGBTQ unit in school, right? This
Right.
isn't an LGBTQ book. This is a book I'm using because it's a great example of how to teach text to self connections or how to determine importance or whatever the literacy skill or strategy that you're doing is. It just happens to have a gay character in it, or it happens to have a trans character or whatever it may be. And I think being just really upfront about that, knowing who your supports are, like the school librarian might be a really excellent person to help you know how to talk about the book a little bit more with parents.
Yeah. And I think just thinking about that, having the thought partner, the person to partner with you. I remember, Aimee, you came in with the book Strong. And it's a story of a wrestler. And at the beginning of it, he grows up, he's a strong little baby, and he grows up to be the strong guy. And his whole dream is to be in the strongman competition. And he always, when he works out, he wears like bright colors. But when he goes to the strongman competition, he realizes that nobody's wearing those bright colors. So he starts wearing more darker colors. And at the same time, he happens to fall in love with a man and they get married. And his husband notices that he's not wearing these bright colors when he goes to the competitions. And he thinks that maybe why he's not winning. And so Aimee read this book to the class, and I just remember thinking how, watching another person teach my students and see how the conversation went and see how she did it also helped me with my thinking too about how to do these books. So I really can't stress enough to have a thinking partner or someone else that you can talk to about these situations if you can.
That's a great example too of when kids just surprise you because they are so much like smarter and they think more deeply than we sometimes give them credit for. Because here I was thinking like, oh, I'm going to have to really walk them through this idea of like the title is strong. And yes, he's a strong man, but he's strong because he's brave enough to be his authentic self. And so all I did was show the cover and the title. And I was like, so here's, look at the picture of the man and the title is strong. And in the cover, he's like got his muscles showing. And they were immediately like, yeah, but he might be strong in other ways. Like maybe he has to be strong to have his rainbow mohawk. Like I was just like, okay, well, you all can just teach the class for us. Yeah. But it's a great example of we don't know unless we give them the chance. And if we're so hesitant and we're so afraid, I think sometimes we're so caught up in our fear about parent pushback. It holds us back, but we don't know that we're going to have parent pushback, right? Some of us do, right? Depending on the community in which you live. And you definitely have to be aware of how your administration will respond if there is a challenge to that book. I would say I recommend strongly to know your school district's policy on book challenges. A lot of times the districts they very smartly make it a pretty tedious and lengthy process to officially challenge a book. And I love that that's the way that it is, because if parents feel that strongly, they should have to do the work to really push back on this and lodge a formal request to have a book challenged or removed or, just to speak their mind about it. They should have to know that book well. And so you want to make sure that you are well versed in it so that you are able to respond to a parent and say, like, this is our formal process that all parents and caregivers are welcome to go through, and let that kind of fall back on the person who is pushing back.
Yeah.
Your comments here.
Yeah, there are. And I know, Aimee, you put together a list that we were going to share of different resources. So I know I have actually attended PD online with Pride and Less Prejudice, and listened to people present there and share what they were doing. And that was very helpful for me too. So if you can't, or you don't have a partner at your school, you don't have to have somebody just at your school. You can have other thought partners or do the research, look at the reading on your own, because I learned a lot where I got the idea for having my, comments for parents to write down. That came from one of the PDs that I went to. And so, all of these books and websites are incredible. And Aimee, I know you have a colleague. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about this colleague.
Thank you. So the first one that's on there is Early Pride Matters. My colleague at Loyola, Dr. Adam Kennedy, it's just such an amazing researcher and such an amazing educator. And so he has been spending about 2 years working on this website of Early Pride Matters. And the focus of that is supporting teachers with using LGBTQ inclusive curriculum and text and conversation from birth through age 5. So he really focuses on how you can start right away with the babies on being able to talk about this and making this a regular part of the books that you share with young children. And he has a wealth of resources on that site. I can't speak highly enough about it, including some actual like teaching guides, sort of, for lack of a better descriptor, on how to use a bunch of different LGBTQ inclusive texts in different age ranges between birth. And so there's like a baby one, a toddler one, and then a preschool age section. And he ties it all to the standards as well. And so, if you're working on color sorting with a bunch of 3-year-olds, you can use this particular LGBTQ inclusive text to teach those concepts. And so it's a really fantastic resource. Also, I know somebody in the comments asked about book suggestions. So the inclusive text site that is linked on the second spot there is just a supplement to a book that a colleague and I put out that I think somebody mentioned earlier, with book lists for many different categories. And we try to update that like twice a year. So I'm actually in the process now of compiling some new titles that we can put on that website. But you can look there for many different identities that you can bring into your classroom, not just to have them on your shelf, but to truly center them in your instruction. GLSEN is a great resource. It's all for teachers, educators, and how to create safe and inclusive spaces for kids. And then there's another link to another list of some books that are, I think, really good to just kind of get started in this work. And then at the bottom, we also have our article is referenced there, as well as a really great book that I love called Reading the Rainbow. It's an excellent book. It will describe further classroom vignettes about using LGBTQ inclusive text in the classroom. And those authors are absolutely amazing. They have several journal articles out too, including how you can use all picture books. Like if you're in a school district, like perhaps you're in a state where you're not even allowed to bring up any sort of mention of gender or sexuality in the classroom, like how you can sort of give a queer reading to a heteronormative focused picture book, which is just so brilliant. So I really would strongly recommend a lot of the readings by those two authors as well.
Yeah, I was looking back through some of the comments and thinking about some of the other conversations that I've had with people who, were curious about how do I approach things. One was, what do you say to someone who says, I think you're indoctrinating children? And my comment is always, well, I teach a unit on penguins and nobody became a penguin. So I'm not really indoctrinating anybody. I'm just providing them with all of the things that are out there. I'm, as Aimee said, like we're reading books with these characters. We're not saying anybody should go out and do that. And another comment asked, like, how do you handle the issue of homosexuality? We don't talk about it, just like I don't talk about heterosexuality with my students either. We just talk about this family has two moms, and this family has a mom and a dad, and this family has a dad and a stepmom. And so, it's just presenting it. And when people, sort of to Aimee's point about like having people really read the book and do the work, if you read Tango Makes Three, there's no mention of anything in there. It's just two male penguins who love each other. That's it. I mean, and we'll say to our kids, well, you love your dad, you love your mom. Like, two people can love each other. That's fine. And so, especially at the second grade level and primary, you're able to teach about the books, and the kids make their own conclusions. So I'm not, the indoctrination piece is, if we were indoctrinating, then everybody would be heterosexual because all of the books that we had as children were. So
I think that's the main thing that I was going to say too, Katie, is that, bringing sexuality in some ways into the classroom is not new. Like, from keeping a photo of your family on your desk and talking about, if you're a female teacher and you are married to a man, and talking about your husband, that was always okay. And so if you are talking about your husband and you're a male teacher, like, why is that different than if you were talking about it as a woman? And, I think like you said, all of the books that we grew up with, that had it was a very heteronormative perspective through all of those books. And so kids are not new to that being part of the classroom. And the other point I wanted to make, I know we're almost out of time, is that I don't think there are many of us as educators that would allow parents to protest us, like, stopping racist comments in the classroom. And so why then would we say it's okay for homophobic or transphobic comments to occur in the classroom? Or if we were reading books that talked about, fighting racism, and a parent objected, it would be ridiculous. We would never say, like, oh, I need to consider that parent's point of view. And so we shouldn't do that for LGBTQ inclusive topics and texts either. So,
right. Because we're on the side of kids. And
yeah,
we know that kids and families come in all ways, and we have to support them because we love our kids.
yeah, 100%. I just wanted to say, I know we're just about out of time, but I love this idea of hope being the theme and all of this, because I feel like working with you, Katie, gives me so much hope in what is occurring in classrooms more and more, and seeing the students and the way that these young children can talk about all of these big topics gives me so much hope. And I'm really, truly hopeful that we're going to see this new generation grow up to be such change makers in the world. And I just love that so much. It gives me chills to think about it. So we're so grateful to have you out in the world and working with students.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all your support. It wouldn't have happened without you. So thank you.
And thank you to you both. The chat was full of lots of ideas and reactions, and just to shout out while you both are here one more time, all of the beautiful work that you heard today is captured so thoughtfully inside of their research study. And I think one thing that really struck me in your study and in what you talked about today, and came up in the comments as well, is how it's often the adults who are more uncertain, because we have internalized homophobia from school, from society, from the things that we were taught. And even queer people, we have internalized homophobia if we went through the schooling that we went through. And to see your classroom alive with kids being curious and problem solving and facilitating in the way where you're stepping out of the way and then you come back in to just push or question or help them ask a little more, it also gives me hope, so much hope for where we're headed, but it's intentional. So thank you both for all of your intention, work around both queer text with young students, but just all of the work you do in teaching and learning in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone in the comments. It was amazing to read everything that you all had to say. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And as we have been talking about across the day, if you felt, because you were inspired during this session, please head over to our charity page, and there you can pay the Joy Forward. No amount is too small. You can learn more about Top Notch Scholars and Latinx Kidlit Book Festival, and there you can pay the Joy Forward. And I'm actually going to leave here in a moment to head over to the closing session, where Amira and I will be leading an interactive chat about putting hope into action. We hope you'll join us and chat along with us. We'll kind of do an old school Twitter chat version where we have some questions queued up and invite you to talk along with us there. So please do find us over at the closing session in just a few moments. And thank you one final time to Aimee and Katie for this incredible session. The resources page that they shared is now linked right on the general agenda. So if you go back to our main website, you will find it there as well too. All right, everyone, have a great afternoon. Thank you for joining the EdClab gathering today, and we look forward to staying connected.